Military experts called it suicide. They said any army that tried this on D-Day would be wiped out in minutes. But on June 6, 1944, the Canadians did it anyway. 14,000 men slammed into Juno Beach under machine gun fire, mines, and concrete bunkers built to be unbreakable. The Germans were ready. The Atlantic Wall was waiting. Every rule of warfare said, slow down or die. The Canadians chose the opposite. Instead of waiting between waves, they came non-stop, one after another, flooding the beach with men. No pauses. No consolidation. No time for the enemy to aim. Allied commanders watched in disbelief, convinced they were witnessing a massacre. But within minutes, something impossible started happening. The beach wasn't killing them. It was breaking the Germans. The beach everyone expected to fail. Military experts called it suicide, not because they doubted the courage of the men, but because the math was brutal. On the morning of June 6, 1944, every calculation pointed to the same conclusion. The soldiers landing at Juno Beach were about to be cut down. At 7:45 a.m., the English Channel was violent. 10-foot waves slammed into landing craft packed with Canadian infantry. Cold seawater sprayed over steel ramps. Men vomited. Others gripped their rifles in silence. Ahead of them, barely visible through fog and smoke, lay the gray outline of the French coast. This was Juno Beach. Behind those dunes stood Hitler's Atlantic Wall, concrete bunkers reinforced with steel, some with walls over 8 feet thick. Machine gun nests covered every approach. Mortars were pre-sighted. Artillery guns were aimed directly at the waterline. Mines were buried beneath the sand. Barbed wire waited to funnel attackers into perfect killing zones. And waiting behind it all were more than 20,000 German defenders. The Canadians knew this beach was dangerous. Everyone did. In fact, many Allied planners quietly believed Juno might be the most heavily defended sector of the entire D-Day invasion. Worse than Utah. Worse than Gold. Possibly worse than Omaha. The sea did not help. Juno had the highest waves of any landing beach that morning. Several landing craft capsized before ever reaching shore. Men weighed down with 60 pounds of gear struggled in freezing water, fighting not to drown before the battle even began. But the fear ran deeper than the waves. 2 years earlier, Canadian forces had attacked the French coast at Dieppe. It was supposed to be a test run, a limited raid. Instead, it became one of the worst disasters of the war. Canadian troops followed the textbook perfectly. Slow advances, carefully timed waves, pauses to consolidate positions. The Germans slaughtered them. In just 9 hours, nearly 70% of the force was killed, wounded, or captured. Dieppe haunted the Canadians now approaching Juno Beach. Every officer knew the numbers. Every veteran remembered the screams, the chaos, the failure. And every Allied commander watching from offshore believed they were about to see history repeat itself. The conventional wisdom was clear. When assaulting a fortified beach, caution saved lives. You land in waves spaced several minutes apart. You secure the waterline. You move methodically. You follow doctrine. That doctrine had failed the Canadians once already. Now, as the landing craft bucked toward the shore, Allied command ships watched with quiet dread. British officers were polite, but skeptical. American officers were openly doubtful. Some dismissed the Canadians as colonial troops, brave, yes, but inexperienced. They wondered why Canada had been given such a dangerous sector. Standing on one of those command ships was Major General Rod Keller. He was not impressive by appearance. 42 years old. No famous military lineage. No reputation for brilliance. He did not speak like the polished generals around him. He was blunt, practical, and deeply affected by Dieppe. Keller had spent months studying that failure. He read every report. He spoke to survivors. He timed the pauses. He traced the moments when momentum died and when German fire intensified. And he reached a conclusion that went against everything the manuals taught. The problem at Dieppe was not that the Canadians had been reckless. It was that they had been too careful. Keller believed the most dangerous place in any beach assault was not the waterline. It was the open ground between the water and the enemy fortifications. That was the kill zone. and every second spent there meant more men died. Caution, Keller realized, was not saving lives. It was killing them. As the first Canadian landing craft lurched toward Juno Beach, Keller knew what he had ordered would either change warfare forever or condemn 14,000 men in minutes. There would be no slow waves today. There would be no pauses, only momentum. The final assault plan was circulated quietly, not because it was secret, but because few officers wanted their names attached to it. Standard Allied doctrine demanded discipline through spacing. Landing waves were supposed to hit the beach several minutes apart. The first wave secured ground. The second reinforced. The third expanded. It was orderly, predictable, and, according to every field manual in existence, safe. Major General Rod Keller tore that logic apart. He argued that spacing was a luxury the attackers could not afford. German gunners needed only seconds to reorient their weapons. Give them time, and they would turn the beach into a slaughterhouse. Momentum, Keller insisted, was the only shield infantry had. His proposal was radical. Canadian units would land in near-continuous waves, some less than 30 seconds apart. There would be no long pauses, no waiting to consolidate positions. Men would push forward immediately, even if units became mixed or command structures broke down. To many Allied planners, it sounded reckless. British officers questioned whether the Canadians would lose control entirely. American observers warned that congestion on the beach could multiply casualties. One senior staff officer reportedly called the plan a gamble with lives. Keller did not deny it, but he reminded them of Dieppe. Their Canadian troops had followed doctrine perfectly and been annihilated perfectly in return. German defenders had exploited every pause, every hesitation, every moment when attackers waited for orders that never came. This time, Keller wanted to deny the enemy those moments. His argument was brutally simple. German weapons could kill a finite number of men per minute, flood the beach fast enough, and the system would break. It was an argument based not on courage or hope, but on cold arithmetic. Reluctantly, Allied command approved a modified version of Keller's plan. The Canadians would try it. At 7:45 a.m., the first ramps dropped. Men spilled into waist-deep water under machine gun fire. Some were hit before their boots touched sand. Others tripped over submerged obstacles or bodies already floating in the surf. Explosions sent columns of water and sand into the air, tearing apart entire sections of beach in seconds. German gunners fired exactly as they had been trained. They targeted the waterline. What they did not expect was how fast the next wave arrived. Landing craft followed each other in rapid succession, barely spaced apart. As one group struggled ashore, another slammed in behind them, and then another, and another. The beach began to fill. Smoke thickened. Orders became hard to hear. Units intermingled. Some officers were killed within moments of landing. Radios failed. Carefully planned formations dissolved almost immediately. By every conventional measure, the assault was becoming chaotic. But chaos, Keller had predicted, would favor the attackers. German machine gunners adjusted their fire, and then adjusted again, struggling to track targets that no longer came in neat, predictable bursts. Mortar crews fired blindly into smoke. Artillery rounds overshot advancing Canadians, who were already pushing beyond expected positions. The Germans had trained for pauses. They had not trained for floods. Within minutes, Canadian troops began pushing off the beach entirely, moving toward the seawall and the dunes beyond. Engineers rushed forward under fire, blowing gaps in barbed wire and clearing minefields while infantry covered them at point-blank range. Losses were heavy, but they were not catastrophic. Observers offshore stared through binoculars in disbelief. The Canadians were not pinned down. They were not stalling. They were moving inland, faster than projected, faster than planned, faster than anyone had thought possible. German commanders began issuing frantic reports. Defensive lines were being penetrated earlier than expected. Strong points designed to dominate open sands suddenly found attackers behind them. The beach that was supposed to kill the Canadians was failing to do its job, and as the first hour of D-Day passed, it became clear that Keller's gamble had done something extraordinary. It had stolen time from the enemy. And in war, Time is everything. By 8 a.m., the beach was a war zone in motion. The first wave of Canadian soldiers had hit the sand under a hail of bullets and shell fire. But they did not pause. They ran. They pushed forward. Every second spent in the open meant another chance to die, and yet they pressed on. Behind them, 30-second waves of men followed like an unstoppable river, filling every meter of beach. It was organized chaos, a storm of human determination. And it worked. German gunners could not focus on isolated groups. As soon as they aimed, another group had already passed. Mortars fired blindly into the smoke, missing their targets. Artillery rounds overshot or struck empty sand. The very systems designed to maximize German firepower failed against Keller's strategy. Amid the chaos, specialized tanks, Hobart's Funnies, rolled off landing craft. These were not ordinary tanks. Some carried massive rotating drums to clear mines. Others had flamethrowers, mortars, or bridge-making equipment. They moved ahead of the infantry, clearing paths through the minefields and obstacles that had been designed to kill. Canadian soldiers followed, running through the gaps, firing, advancing, never stopping. Smoke, fire, and sand filled the air. The roar of engines mixed with the crack of rifles. Explosions threw men to the ground, but even those who fell were replaced instantly by the next wave. Momentum did not pause for casualties. Momentum was survival. By 8:15, engineers marked safe lanes through barbed wire. Tanks destroyed key bunkers. Machine gun nests were silenced by infantry charges. The first real sign that Keller's gamble might succeed appeared. The Canadians had penetrated the beach defenses faster than anyone expected. Observers aboard Allied ships could hardly believe it. American officers had predicted Juno Beach would mirror Dieppe with massive casualties. British officers had warned that the unorthodox landing waves would collapse under chaos. Now, just 30 minutes after the first assault, Canadian units were pushing inland, bypassing the German kill zones. Every step forward brought more questions for the Germans. Their calculations had relied on predictability. Now, unpredictability ruled. Defensive lines were breached before they could even prepare. Some German units attempted counterattacks, but by the time they organized, the Canadians had already moved beyond their reach. The key to success was relentless momentum. Each man, each unit, acted as both shield and spear for the next. No pause, no hesitation. Each second was spent moving through danger rather than waiting for orders that might never come. At 8:30, roughly 45 minutes into the landing, Canadian troops had secured a beachhead far larger than anticipated. Forward scouts reported that entire sectors of the Atlantic Wall were neutralized, either destroyed by tanks, abandoned by retreating Germans, or taken by infantry. What was supposed to be the most fortified, deadly stretch of coastline was crumbling under a flood of men and steel. Amid the action, Major General Keller watched from a command ship. He had risked everything on this unconventional plan. His heart raced as reports came in. Every unit that advanced confirmed the impossible. The Canadians were alive, moving fast, and creating openings that other Allied forces could only dream of. The contrast with other beaches was striking. On Omaha Beach, American troops were still pinned at the waterline. On Utah, advances were slow. British sectors moved steadily but cautiously. Yet here at Juno, the Canadians surged forward, their speed turning the Atlantic Wall, the symbol of German invincibility, into a broken line. By 9 a.m., it was no longer theory. Keller's radical plan had worked. The enemy was not killing the Canadians. The Canadians were killing the enemy's plans. And in doing so, they began to reshape the expectations of Allied command. The first waves were no longer just surviving. They were conquering. And the lesson was becoming painfully clear to anyone watching. In some battles, hesitation is far more deadly than courage. By 9:15 a.m., the tide of battle had turned in ways no one ashore could have predicted. German soldiers, trained for methodical defense, had prepared to cut down attackers one wave at a time. They had pre-sighted mortars, machine guns, and artillery. But Keller's plan had shattered their assumptions. Waves came too quickly. The beach was never empty, but it was never static. German guns, trained for isolated targets, found themselves aiming at shadows. The Canadians had turned chaos into a weapon. Infantry pushed forward, running across open sand, sometimes in full view of machine guns, with tanks blazing ahead, clearing mines and destroying bunkers. Every meter gained was a psychological blow to the Germans. They had not faced an enemy moving with such relentless, unbroken aggression. The first town beyond the beach, Courcelles, was expected to take the Canadians hours to secure. Instead, by 9:30 a.m., forward units were already reaching the outskirts. Engineers cleared barbed wire and obstacles while soldiers fired from coverless positions. Resistance, when it came, was quickly neutralized. German troops had no time to regroup. Positions meant to slow the attackers collapsed under momentum. Reports began reaching Allied command ships. Canadian units had advanced farther than any predicted distance for D-Day at this hour. Casualty estimates were half of what had been feared. Where planners had expected disaster, they found speed had created survival. Even American and British officers could not hide their astonishment. Some openly remarked that the Canadians were moving like men possessed. Messages flew back and forth, asking if the speed was sustainable, warning that supply lines might fail. But Keller's preparation had accounted for that. He had trained units for relentless forward motion. Troops carried extra rations and ammunition. Engineers pushed bridges and cleared lanes. Every obstacle had a solution ready in advance. German morale began to crack. Small groups of defenders surrendered rather than fight to the relentless assault. By 10 a.m., more than 1,000 German soldiers had laid down their arms. Entire positions were abandoned. The Atlantic Wall, a structure designed to be unbreachable, was being neutralized within the first 3 hours. The specialized tanks continued their work. Mine-clearing drums spun. Flamethrowers blasted fortified bunkers, and mobile mortars fired into entrenched positions. Infantry moved in behind, taking ground as engineers widened gaps for the next wave. It was a perfect symphony of controlled chaos. On the command ship, Admiral Percy Nels allowed himself a grim smile. He had championed Keller's plan against stiff resistance from Allied headquarters. Now, watching the Canadians sweep inland, he understood. Speed had been the real weapon all along. Hesitation had killed at Dieppe. Momentum would save lives at Juno. By mid-morning, the Canadian advance had created a ripple effect. Neighboring British sectors noticed the success and began pressing forward, though not yet with the same velocity. German commanders struggled to respond, sending reinforcements where they could, but units arriving late could only plug gaps temporarily. The Canadians were already beyond those positions. The flow of troops, engineers, and tanks became almost relentless. Each wave reinforced momentum, making the next advance faster. By 11 a.m., forward Canadian positions were several miles inland. Juno Beach, once thought to be a tomb, was now a corridor of conquest. The soldiers themselves felt it. Exhaustion was constant, but fear had transformed into determination. They were not only fighting for survival, they were proving something. To themselves, to their commanders, to the world. Every meter gained was a testament to trust in Keller's plan and in each other. By noon, the Germans faced an impossible choice. Fight to the death in fragmented groups or surrender. And for many, surrender became the only realistic option. Keller's gamble, a radical departure from doctrine, was not only succeeding, it was redefining what could be achieved under fire. For the first time that morning, the full scale of the Canadian breakthrough became clear to everyone watching. The underdogs had become the spearhead of D-Day. By early afternoon, the Canadian advance had become unstoppable. The first wave that had landed on Juno Beach were now moving several miles inland. What had been predicted as a bloodbath was instead a historic breakthrough. Where the enemy had counted on predictable, methodical attacks, they now faced an unrelenting surge of men and machines. Engineers cleared remaining obstacles with precision, while infantry and tanks continued their advance, firing at bunkers, machine gun nests, and snipers who attempted to delay them. The specialized tanks, the Hobart's Funnies, had proven invaluable. Some blasted through concrete bunkers, others cleared mines, some carried bridges across small rivers and ditches, keeping the momentum alive. Every unit followed the paths cleared by the first waves, moving in a rhythm that seemed impossible to coordinate but worked flawlessly under pressure. By 1 p.m., reports reached the Allied command that Canadian troops had advanced nearly 9 miles inland, further than any other Allied forces that day. On the other beaches, American and British forces were still struggling to consolidate positions close to the coast. At Omaha, Americans were pinned down at the seawall. At Utah, the advance was cautious. Gold and Sword saw steady progress, but nothing like Juno. German commanders were scrambling. Units intended to hold the Canadians back were overrun before they could organize. Reinforcement from the 21st Panzer Division arrived too late to establish effective defensive lines. Instead of fighting from prepared positions, they had to attack while moving, which left them exposed to Canadian infantry and tank support. Casualties mounted, morale plummeted, and more units began surrendering. By 2 p.m., the first formal surrender negotiations began. A German major approached Canadian lines under a white flag. He reported that his regiment, more than 800 men, wished to capitulate. News of the spread, and other isolated German units, unable to hold against the relentless push, followed suit. Thousands surrendered over the next hours. Meanwhile, Canadian logistics officers faced an unexpected challenge. The rapid advance had thrown supply plans into chaos. Trucks, rations, ammunition, and medical supplies had been scheduled for positions near the beaches. Now, troops were nearly 9 miles inland. Officers adapted quickly, improvising supply routes and using every available vehicle to ensure forward units could continue their push. The Canadian assault had a ripple effect beyond military lines. French civilians, long oppressed under German occupation, began emerging from hiding. Towns like Courcelles and surrounding villages saw soldiers moving in hours earlier than expected. Civilians cheered, waved hidden flags, and offered food and wine. Liberation had arrived faster than anyone imagined. The Canadians were not only winning militarily, but they were also transforming the local landscape into a symbol of hope. By late afternoon, the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's so-called impregnable barrier, had been broken. Hundreds of bunkers destroyed or abandoned, machine gun nests neutralized, and minefields cleared. The Canadians had penetrated deeper into France than any other Allied force on D-Day. The beach, once thought to be a death trap, had become a corridor for conquest. Allied commanders, both British and American, were forced to reassess their own tactics. Keller's gamble, once considered reckless, had proven the value of speed, aggression, and momentum. Commanders took notes, observing how continuous pressure had kept German forces off balance. What had been dismissed as unorthodox or foolhardy was now a model for success. By 5 p.m., the beach itself had transformed. Ships continued to ferry reinforcements and supplies, but the focus was no longer on securing a foothold. Instead, Canadian troops were establishing forward positions, digging in for night, and preparing to advance further inland the next morning. The momentum would not stop, and the lessons learned at Juno Beach would ripple through Allied strategy for the remainder of the campaign. As the sun dipped low over the horizon, the magnitude of what had been achieved became clear. 14,000 Canadian soldiers, facing what many had called certain death, had not only survived, they had shattered the Atlantic Wall and proven that innovation, courage, and relentless momentum could defy the expectations of the world's top military minds. As evening fell on June 6, 1944, Juno Beach had transformed from a deadly trap into a triumph of strategy, courage, and relentless will. 14,000 Canadian soldiers had survived what experts called suicide and had advanced farther inland than any other Allied force that day. The Atlantic Wall, once believed impregnable, was a broken line of concrete and chaos. The impossible had been achieved. Major General Rod Keller, the architect of this audacious plan, watched from a command ship. He knew the gamble had worked, but the human cost was still real. Hundreds of men had died. Many more were wounded. War is never clean. Yet his radical approach, continuous waves, near constant momentum, aggression over caution, had saved countless lives compared to what conventional doctrine predicted. Hesitation had killed at Dieppe. Speed and momentum had preserved life at Juno. Admiral Percy Nels, who had supported Keller against skeptical Allied planners, allowed himself a rare smile. The gamble had been validated. Canadian forces had demonstrated that innovation in the field could outpace even the most sophisticated defenses. And their achievement was not just military, it was symbolic. Canada, long underestimated by larger powers, had proven it could execute complex operations with precision, bravery, and ingenuity. The immediate impact rippled across the Allied forces. British units began incorporating elements of the Canadian tactics into their operations. Orders emphasized maintaining forward pressure, avoiding unnecessary pauses, and denying the enemy time to regroup. American forces, though slower to adapt, eventually followed suit. By the summer of 1944, the principles of momentum warfare were spreading across the Allied armies, transforming how amphibious assaults were executed. Keller's approach, once considered reckless, became a model for success. In the months following D-Day, historians and military strategists began to study Juno Beach in detail. They examined the data. Canadian casualties were approximately half of what planners had predicted. The German 716th Infantry Division, meant to hold the coast for days, had begun collapsing within hours. Entire regiments surrendered under the relentless pressure of continuous assault. These statistics confirmed what observers had seen firsthand. Momentum could be a decisive weapon in modern warfare. Yet for Keller personally, recognition came slowly. A month after D-Day, during the Battle for Cannes, he was seriously wounded by a German artillery shell. His combat command ended abruptly. He spent months recovering in England and returned to Canada to assume administrative roles. Despite his pivotal role, he faded from the public spotlight. Canada celebrated its veterans, but Keller himself remained largely unknown. It was American commanders, like General Omar Bradley, who first publicly credited him and the Canadian approach in post-war memoirs. Bradley described watching the Canadians advance faster and farther than anyone had expected, acknowledging that innovation can come from those underestimated or overlooked. Beyond military lessons, Juno Beach offered broader insights. It proved that courage combined with innovation could overcome obstacles once thought insurmountable. It highlighted the dangers of underestimating people, nations, or strategies based on assumptions. The Canadians had been dismissed as colonial troops. They had suffered through failure at Dieppe. Yet this very underestimation became a source of strength. They had something to prove, and that determination transformed into tactical advantage. The principle of speed through the danger zone has endured. Modern military academies around the world now teach that hesitation is often more deadly than aggression. Momentum doctrine, first proven at Juno, influences not only warfare but also leadership strategy and problem-solving in countless fields beyond combat. The story of Juno Beach is a lesson in daring, adaptability, and the power of decisive action under pressure. Rod Keller passed away in 1954 at the age of 52. His health never fully recovered from the wounds sustained in battle. At his funeral, a small group of veterans from the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division served as pallbearers. They knew the full impact of his leadership, that it had saved lives, shattered expectations, and rewritten the playbook for amphibious warfare. On June 6, 1944, the Canadians did what many thought impossible. They turned a beach designed to kill them into a corridor of victory. And in doing so, they proved a timeless truth. Sometimes the fastest way through danger is not around it. It is straight through, driven by courage, momentum, and the determination to survive and succeed. Juno Beach is more than history. It is a lesson in innovation, audacity, and the underestimated power of those who have something to prove.